Welcome to Cyprus, everyone. Hope you're good to see. We got some good responses on my shirt from a while ago, so I decided to bring it out for another video to get the great, wonderful shirt experience. We're here in Cyprus. You can see it's quite beautiful. It is November, actually late November, and the weather has been quite excellent. I was here to get married, actually, quite wonderful. And we're going to talk about two different things, one in this video, and then we're going to do another video as well. So we're going to talk first of all about international structuring in Cyprus. So this is not really for Cypriot residents. Cypriot residents have okay tax setups in general, although there's a whole conversation you could have on that. It's not usually a place that we're dealing with clients, it's usually people who are coming here. So Cyprus is quite interesting because it's part of the EU, okay, and in particular part of the EEA, which means that we gain access to the European payment space. So we can have SEPA transfers, we can have good payment processing, etc. It has been traditionally an easier place to set up banking, although it's also been a risky place. You might recall back in around 2013, there was banking problems, and as a result, people lost a significant portion of the money that they had on deposit, over 100,000 euros. So not so good. And you know, it was good that we'd been directing people away from it back then. That being said, as things have become more challenging in the world, this became an increasingly popular option. It was very similar in regards to Gibraltar and to Hong Kong. So you could kind of have compared back in the day Gibraltar, Hong Kong, and Cyprus. Cyprus is not a zero tax country. It's 12.5% tax, which is not great if you compare. Bulgaria is lower, Hungary is lower, Montenegro is lower. It's the same as Ireland, Andorra is lower, San Marino sometimes lower, etc. But what you could have in addition to the 12.5% tax rate was there's some special tax regimes, and in particular you could have a non-resident company. So non-resident company essentially means the management and control is not in Cyprus, and therefore the income is not sourced in Cyprus, so hence it was non-taxable in Cyprus. Now, why we didn't like Cyprus historically compared to, say, Gibraltar, was you still needed audited financials, and that was a hassle, right? And I also think laws are all written in Greek, so it's harder to understand. Although Cyprus is a super English-friendly country, almost everybody speaks English here, the reality is that it just made that little bit of extra hassle. That being said, as substance has become more and more important, it's an option where you can go and you can set something up in this part of the world that you might not have had the opportunity to do that in, say, Gibraltar, right? So you have a higher population base here. Obviously it's an island, it's not a lot of people, but there's still some opportunities, and so that's, you know, pretty good. So increasingly it sort of has become more popular. Again, if you compare to Hong Kong, very similar, right? Hong Kong has a 16.5% tax rate, 8.5 or 8.25, sorry, on lower income, but you could have it as an offshore company and not pay tax. So that was kind of what was going on there. Same thing in Gibraltar, 10% tax, but you could have this advantage of having something where you were a non-resident company and so you didn't pay tax. So that was kind of what would happen. So today, that is not really the case so much. It's much harder to set up banking for a Gibraltar company, much harder to set up banking for a Hong Kong company. And so you might say, okay, let's use Cyprus. And a lot of people have been really big on Cyprus. Cyprus is the way. And realistically, nah, it was, I would say, a medium level solution. I don't think Cyprus has ever been the best solution, but there are some cases where it can be the best solution. What has happened recently, unfortunately, is that now banking has become really hard here as well for non-residents. So we know a ton of people who've had their accounts in Cyprus shut down, a ton of people who are forming companies for Cyprus or in Cyprus now can't get bank accounts in Cyprus. And so the question is, well, now you're looking elsewhere, which raises the question of, do you gain an advantage of being in Cyprus versus Gibraltar versus Hong Kong, etc.? And it really depends. So why would you want to be here? Well, number one, as I said, usually if we're looking at being here, it's because we want to be in the EU. Now, another disadvantage of Cyprus over Gibraltar was Gibraltar's not part of the VAT regime or VAT directive, whereas Cyprus is. Okay, so there is VAT in Cyprus, there's not in Gibraltar. But we would set up, we'd say, all right, we could set up a company in Cyprus. We are going to take advantage of, if we can, we'll get banking here. So if you're going to have a real business here, wages are fairly low, but not low by European standards. So they're quite a bit higher than, say, Greece, higher than Bulgaria, higher than whatever. I was just having dinner with a client a few days ago, and they're looking at getting set up here, and they figured it's going to cost them 20% more in wages in Cyprus than in Bulgaria. So that gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of how you're going to have some extra costs, again, depending on where you are. But there's no dividend withholding tax. So in theory, if you can have zero tax, that's still great. You can have zero withholding tax, so that's great. And you can have a European company that can have payment processing. You will have to do annual audited financials. You'll have to do that. It's going to cost you some money. It's not the cheapest place to form a company. Usually you're talking maybe like 2,500 euros-ish, somewhere around that range to set up a company. Then of course you have to pay for banking, you have to pay for all these different things. That's with apostille documents. So one of the advantages, if you don't need apostille documents, great, although it's quite cheap here. So you can consider that as a bit of a trade-off. It's good from a regulatory standpoint in Cyprus. So a lot of people would come here who had businesses that were difficult to set up elsewhere. So the adult industry, things like that would come to Cyprus. It's a much less regulated space, okay? So these are all kind of some trade-offs. So if you're in the situation where you say, hey, look, 12.5% tax is okay for me, I'm good with that. There's a good network of tax treaties in Cyprus, so it might be very valuable. And if you can actually set up and get local banking, then hey, you probably don't want to store a ton of money in the bank, just because the banking system, it's had a bad track record. Even after they went down, FBME was one of the few that didn't have problems, and then FBME later had problems, and it was even worse. So this whole thing, you kind of have to be aware. Cyprus is a little bit risky place to store a lot of money. I wouldn't typically store a lot of money here. However, there's a bunch of cases where, if you're willing for operations, it could be pretty competitive as far as Europe goes. It is certainly whitelisted in most cases around Europe, not always, but most cases, so that's useful. Like I said, you have access to the tax treaties, that's useful. And wages are not super high. It's not amazingly well connected by air, so if you have to fly in and do things, it's okay, but not great. Okay, so anyway, that gives you a little bit of an idea of understanding what the environment is like in Cyprus today. You can set up a company pretty easily. Banking has gotten much tougher. Hopefully over time that will change, but we'll see. We're in a situation where you potentially can get zero tax. You do that by having a non-resident company, which means management control is not here. So Cyprus is one of the 2 countries remaining in Europe where residency is based purely on management and control, not based on place of incorporation, which is Gibraltar is the other one. So you can potentially do that. If not, you're at 12.5%. It's not outrageously high, not outrageously low either. And yeah, so that kind of gives you a bit of an idea. Hopefully that's helpful. If you want help setting up a Cyprus structure, let us know. If you want to find out if Cyprus is the best place for you, you want a second opinion, reach out to us, and we will talk to you in the next video.